And here's the fourth myth I'd like to blow out of the water. And I saw this on from the Biden campaign today. Billionaires need to pay their fair share. And we've been hearing this forever from Elizabeth Warren to Bernie Sanders, Kamala Harris, essentially saying that the rich people are not paying enough. Well, first of all, do they ever define what a fair share is? They never do. It's an intentionally undefined term, fair share. It means whatever you want it to mean. So first of all, what's fair? And when it comes to taxation, what's fair? I think you'll get different opinions from different people on the issue. Some people think it's fair to tax the rich at a higher rate and to tax the poor nothing at all. Other people think it's fair that we have the same tax rate for everybody, essentially a flat tax, so that everyone is taxed at the same level, proportionately. Some people think that taxation itself is unjust and there's no way the word fair can be used in a discussion about taxation, which is generally where I line up. So, and then on top of it, what's their share? How do you compute what your share is? Are you talking about your share of federal government spending? Are you talking about, well, what are you talking about? I mean, after all, what is your fair share of spending money, of the money that was spent, let's just say, on the Afghanistan war that lasted for 20 years? What's your share of that? What is your duty, your responsibility? How do you decide that? It's just a nebulous term. It means nothing. And yet it is used as a political weapon. And you'll see this every election cycle. And they'll also claim, oh, the rich, they don't pay taxes at all. That's a bunch of crap as well. I mean, just like was it a year ago, Elon Musk paid, if I got it right, $11 billion in taxes when he was moving money around to take cash out of his equity in Tesla so that he could buy Twitter. It's the biggest, payment in taxes by a single person of anyone in American history. The rich pay a ton. In fact, how does this go? It's 70% of all taxes, federal income taxes, 70% are paid by the top 10%. The bottom 40 to 45% pay no federal taxes at all. And even the top 1% actually pay about 40% of the total federal income tax load. So when you see this, billionaires need to pay their fair share, the first thing you should be asking is, well, what's their fair share? Define it. Do you have a mathematical equation? Do you have a moral argument of what's fair? And have you calculated what their share is? Every time I ask this question of somebody, what is the fair share? Please define fair share. You never get a straight answer. You'll always get an answer that says, oh, they just need to pay more. Or it's not right that a teacher is paying a higher percentage than a billionaire. Well, a flat tax would solve that problem, but they don't want a flat tax. What they want is more and more spending for themselves, and they want other people to pay higher taxes. And that's definitely true of the Republicans as well. That's why they want to burden the middle class and the poor with increases in the price of goods through tariffs, so they can cycle some of that money back in the form of corporate welfare to other people. It's just, the whole thing is, I use a Biden term, a bunch of malarkey. And there are a million other political myths like this that I should break down sometime for you. Because the myth of how people perceive the Republicans and Democrats and the reality of Republicans and Democrats are so diametrically opposed. The myth is that they're good and evil, that they're arch enemies, that they have one is for the rich and one is for the little guy, when in fact, 90% of the time, their policies are right in the same ballpark. I mean, look at all the COVID policies, all the COVID spending that increased all the inflation. It happened on Trump's watch, but who was Speaker of the House? Nancy Pelosi, a Democrat. You might think of Reagan's tax cuts in the 80s. You didn't like those. Who was the Speaker of the House in the 80s? Tip O'Neill, a Democrat. So you can see how this all breaks out. Yuri Bolin on the live stream says it was Steve Forbes' idea with the flat tax. Now, I think, how do I say this? The whole concept of an income tax, in my opinion, is unjust. You're taking money away from people. You're taking away the fruits of their labor. That's wrong. In my opinion, people should pay for what they use. That's the right way these sorts of government policies should be funded. And then we can break down what all that means. But when you're telling a single mom trying to raise her 2 children in Seattle to pay for a war in Afghanistan for 20 years, that's not just, that's not fair, that's not a share, that's just immoral. So in a lot of ways, I think the taxation in general is immoral. But if you are going to have a tax, a flat tax is the right way to do it. And a flat tax, even Steve Forbes' flat tax wasn't really a flat tax, because what they will do is, the common objection to a flat tax is that the people will say, well, what about the poor? You want to charge the poor 10% or 15%, the same as what the rich have to pay? And they say, well, the poor don't have the money. But 10% of very little is still very little. But usually so-called flat tax proposals make the first $30,000, $40,000 of income tax-free. So it's still a progressive tax code, but it's just a 2-step process. But they also want to include a lot of deductions. And if you have a lot of deductions and withholdings and tax shelters, that's not a flat tax either. A true flat tax would eliminate your deduction for homeowners insurance interest, for your homeowner mortgage interest. Excuse me. You're in a flat tax, the IRS tax law would be reduced to a single page of paper. No exceptions, no special breaks, no carve-outs, no tax loopholes for anybody. And everyone would pay the same rate. Now, that's not exactly what Steve Forbes presented, Yuri, but it's close. I mean, I think he wanted to keep some of the deductions, particularly the home interest one, because that's obviously one of the biggest deductions that most middle-class people take. But in my opinion, if you have to tax at the federal level, a flat tax on income is probably the least worst of all the possible ways to do it, as long as it's truly flat and that percentage is as low as it possibly can be. But what do we have now? We have different tax rates for different people and different deductions for different special interests and different withholdings and tax carve-outs for special interests. The tax code is a mess. The tax code is about picking winners and losers, and it's anything but fair or anything but share or anything but just. It's a distortion, a manipulation of the way the economy works. And who's behind it? You know who? Both the Republicans and Democrats, because they're getting donations from a lot of the lobbyists. And what do the lobbyists want? They want carve-outs for their industry. They want special protection for their special interests. And that all gets baked into the regulatory code or into the tax code, et cetera. And that's why we are where we are. So I will break down more of these political myths in future stories, particularly in these John Riley Project episodes when there's not a lot of local stuff to talk about. Okay. So that is political myths. But if you have some more thoughts or comments, be sure to type it in the live stream or the live chat on Facebook, X, or on YouTube.